This is, if you recall yesterday, the question that was posed to Glenn Hegar was about the special funds that he voted for and that he's funded. And remember, he's on the Senate Finance Committee. He's running for state comptroller. So Joanne Fleming sets up the question and asks about his support for these funds. And then Deborah Medina follows up with a question because the way that he answers it in such a way that is, in an ideal situation, we would do away with all of these superfluous funds. You know, the Emerging Technologies Fund, and he lists a lot of examples that are probably the most egregious of tax dollars going into industries and businesses that do not deserve and should not be paid with taxpayer dollars. And those funds are the most offensive and the most egregious, and he's saying, yes, in an ideal situation, none of those funds would exist and they would all be abolished. This is where we're picking up the audio. I played that audio for you yesterday, and Deborah Medina catches exactly what I caught, okay? We don't live in a perfect situation. What have you done? And this is the answer that I want you to hear because it leads us into our next audio. Oh, I'm going to play it again because it wasn't loud enough. There we go. Can you hear that?
Those funds reauthorized.
Okay, let me try it again because my audio is not working out for me today. Here we go. Let's try it again.
My answer to TechStop was, if you give them the money, you got a problem with me. They're coming here, they can spend their own dollars to build their own road because I think they can find it in their budget. So in the ideal situation, there would be none of them.
Okay. In the ideal situation, there would be none of them. That's the part I wanted you to hear. And then we move into the questions. The solo clapping, we'll get past that.
Let's get beyond the theory of the ideal situation, because we clearly see session after session after session those funds reauthorized. The expenditures, the crony capitalism, the corporate welfare, whatever you want to call them, those expenditures continue. Kind of what's been your role, and if your belief is that we ought not be using tax dollars that way to stop that sort of spending?
This last session, say for example, with the special use fund, for that one, for example, is that there was reforms put into it to tighten that up. And I ultimately voted for that legislation to tighten it up. We could have tried to make an effort to eliminate it. I did not believe in any shape, form, or fashion the legislature would ultimately eliminate that program. As the bill came over from the House of Representatives to the Senate, it was clear that the legislature on the other side of the rotunda wanted to tighten up those rules. I firmly believe that those rules should be tightened up. I could have made an effort, a greater effort to...
Okay. I could have made an effort. That's the second time he's used that phrase. I could have made an effort. He goes back and corrects himself. A greater effort. But ... he didn't. Let's continue.
The program, however, in essence, it wasn't going to be killed. And the last thing that I wanted it to do was continue in the exact same form that it had, because it was too loose the way it existed.
Okay, so his answer to Deborah Medina's question, she said, if you believe that these funds shouldn't exist, why did you continue to vote for them or allow them to continue session after session after session? And he said, well, there was no way that the House was going to kill this committee, and so I feel like it was, kind of a loose fund. That's politispeak for corrupt. A loose fund, and that we should tighten it up. But he didn't raise the alarm. Now, poor Hildebrand comes on next. This is just a few more minutes of audio, about 3. And in a roundabout way, because remember, he voted for him too. He didn't want to get rid of any of these funds. So he has to ask the question of Glenn Hegar in such a way that doesn't indict himself. So he comes back and he says, okay, do you think that the comptroller did a good job of applying the rules? And you'll see it kind of breaks down from there. It's Hagar's response after that comes back to his tough talk from before. I told him, don't bring me any funding for that. I'm not going to look at any of that. I'm not going to have anything to do with that. Well, the tough talk comes back again right after Hildebrand kind of fumbles through his question. So let's continue with the audio from this point.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Glenn, you mentioned the effort to reform and improve the rules for administering the Defense Trust Fund and some of the other funds because problems were raised, criticisms were made, legitimate concerns were raised, and legitimate criticisms were made that it was broken and needed problems addressed. Both you and I supported the legislation to address those. But do you think that the current controller has done a good job in administering the rules that were adopted for our fix? Did they contribute to the problems that caused us to fix the law? Or was it just the law was broken? Has she done a good job administering those programs? And has she engaged in corporate welfare?
So he just asked in his own, bless his heart kind of way. He kind of fumbles through the question and he asks if the current comptroller has applied the rules that would, quote unquote, tighten up these funds, or has she engaged in corporate welfare? Now, let me stress something here, because Hildebrand revealed something I don't think he intended in his way of handling this question. He is right there in the doghouse with Glenn Hegar on this topic, but he has to pose a question. So he's trying to ask it in such a way that doesn't indict him or Glenn, because they're both guilty. So he's shifting the focus over to Comptroller Susan Combs, and he said, did she apply the rules in such a way, or did she engage in corporate welfare? The answer to that question is the legislature and the governor, which created and funded these special purpose funds. Yes, they did engage in corporate welfare, because the fact of the matter is the comptroller tracks the money, writes the checks, but doesn't write the policy. Let's listen to Glenn's response, because he gets tough again. Let's hear it.
Well, as you mentioned, that fund is over at the comptroller's office. The other funds are not at the comptroller's office. And so, therefore, the question is what I think is the current comptroller probably should have and could have said, I think there's some looseness in this fund quicker. But the fact is making sure and not opposing any type of changes to it. As you mentioned and I said earlier, the comptroller is the person who administers the program and doesn't have the ability in any shape, form, or fashion to change what those rules are. I do think it is the appropriate role of the comptroller or anyone in government when they see a problem to tell someone there's a problem. I mean, you don't just say, oh, well, sorry, I'm going to have to continue to do it the way things have always been done because it's sitting here in my lap. No, it is your job to say there is a problem. By the way, ring the bell, pull the fire alarm down, and make sure something changes.
Nice. Thank you, Glenn Hegar. Ring the bell, pull the fire alarm, and make sure something changes. Now, Glenn Hegar would have you believe that he's the one who, after years of scoring abysmally on the Fiscal Responsibility Index, now he's the one that's going to ring that bell and pull that fire alarm. That's what he's trying to convince us of. Okay, he's going to ring the bell. Why didn't he? If he wants to be entrusted with the checkbook of the 14th largest economy in the world, and he has not rung the bell on the budget, In any of the years that he has been in the Senate, he has never voted against the budget. He has never raised the alarm. He has never raised the alarm on these special funds that he just spent minutes decrying and deriding. Well, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have any of them. Well, why did you keep approving them? Why, as on the Senate Finance Committee, if anybody could raise the alarm, why didn't you? That's the heart of the question. And that's what I get into with him in my conversation after the entire debate was complete.